Are you ready to manage your work and personal world better to live a more fulfilling, productive life? Then you've come to the right place. Welcome to ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity. Here are your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.
And welcome back to ProductivityCast, everybody, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. As you know, I'm Ray Sidney Smith, and I'm here with Augusto Pinaud. How's it going, Augusto?
It's going pretty well.
Fantastic. Well, it's our pleasure to introduce our newest podcast contributor to the ProductivityCast team, Art Gelwicks. He's a business process, project management, and collaboration consultant for professionals, small to medium-sized businesses, and nonprofits. Art is also the founder of the Idea Pump Consultancy. Definitely check out the blog over there at theideapump.com, and is an experienced public speaker. Welcome to ProductivityCast.
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate it. It's good to be here with you guys and talk about the topic du jour.
We're looking forward to having you on as a regular contributor, so that's always a good thing. And so today we are going to be talking about software that I think everybody pretty much knows. I mean, we all use it in some way, shape, or form, which is spreadsheet software. And there are so many today that I thought it would be really fun for us to actually discuss the variety of them and their pros and cons based on how all of us sort of use them. Just as a sort of primer, we started off with really Microsoft Excel. I mean, it was another product that was bought by Microsoft way back, in, I believe it's the 80s, and forgive me someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but the software has developed into what is now Microsoft Excel, and here we are, 30-odd years later, and now we have, products from Apple to open source software like LibreOffice, having Calc, to so many other spreadsheet software. And I want to just sort of talk about what we use, why we use it, and the pros and cons of those pieces. So let's start off with the big elephant in the room, which is Microsoft Excel. What we all have experienced with Microsoft Excel.
Oh, Microsoft Excel is one of those things that I consider the Swiss Army knife of the Office suite. I have used personally and watched Excel be used for just about everything positive and lots of things it probably shouldn't be used for. When you look at the function set that's included in it and its capability of not only handling basic mathematical functionalities and financial calculations, things that are extremely common that it's used for, Excel is also very commonly used as a data modeling tool in a database. In many cases where you would actually think that you would probably push into a larger database system, a lot of those pieces come back into Excel. I work a lot in the collaborative space with systems like SharePoint, so you start to see Excel tying to those data systems to pull information down for analysis. The challenge you get with something like Excel is, you're right, it's the elephant in the room, and unfortunately, often the elephant can take up 90% of the room. It has such a feature set and so many capabilities that, like most things in Office, only about 20% of them are actually used by anyone. So you start to miss out on some of the capabilities. But just over a couple of days, like today, I'm going to be spending most of the day using Excel, building out data models and wireframes for an application design. Is it the optimal tool for that? No, but it can do it, and it can do it relatively well. And it happens to be one that's right there and readily available. So
I remember my first use of Excel was actually developing applications for the company that I worked for. And, because it could do all of these sophisticated formulas, that we just decided to turn the various sheets into the workflow that helped us move data from one set of cells within one tab to the next. Each department put in their information, in each of the various tabs, and then we got sort of the output on the other side. And it did its job, you know what I mean? It was great. And there was a time in which I felt that was sort of the ultimate, until I got more geeky and excited about using Access, Microsoft Access. And then we used, the Microsoft Excel database as our database to pull into Access and really use the front-end Access graphic user interface, the GUI, for purposes of having forms and things of that nature for people to be able to interact with. But yeah, I mean, Microsoft Excel ended up handling so much of what I did on a daily basis. It was great for that. And today I use Google Sheets. It's a phenomenal product. Not if you need some of the functions that Microsoft Excel has right now, but function parity is coming. And if you're already within the G Suite or the Google world in terms of Gmail and Google Drive and so on and so forth, it ends up being something that's really powerful to have it integrated. But I did start off with Microsoft Excel, and actually from a productivity perspective, when I implemented getting things done back in 2001, my entire system, almost except for my calendar, was within a Microsoft Excel database. And so I went ahead and created this system within it, and each tab, covered tasks and projects, and it had my weekly review, designed within it so that I could follow along with my weekly review, and it was really fantastic and worked really well for me for many years. And actually, there's a sample template of that on my website, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But I've since migrated that template to Google Sheets, and you can download the Microsoft Excel workbook for that as well.
It's interesting because when you look at where spreadsheets just in general, not just Excel, but Excel being the leader of them, have come from, we've hit, I don't want to say a watershed moment, but a transitionary point in their evolution because of the move to functionality in the cloud and the press for greater and greater collaboration. You start to see this segmentation between the desktop version of applications and the focus on the cloud-based version. So Google Sheets is a great example. Excel Online is a great example of it. It's a focusing on that 20% of functionality with the opposite aspect of it being the growth of the collaborative pieces, being able to do, for example, multiple person real-time editing of workbooks and be able to actually watch people make those edits, be able to lock sheets in ways so that they can be used as collaborative tools, really changes a lot of the dynamic. It's not just, I've got the spreadsheet now, it's a really powerful spreadsheet, but I'm the only one who can work with it right now until I save it and then allow you to open it. It's a different dynamic entirely. So I think we'll continue to see that evolution and that split between the two platforms grow, but I think we'll also have to see the integration. It's interesting because Microsoft has a bit of a weird position to approach this from because they have a heavy desktop presence and they have the cloud. You look at many of the other systems, for example, Google Sheets, they're only cloud. Will they go to a desktop presence more and more? Possibly, I don't know. Or they may just continue to evolve their cloud presence. It'll be interesting to see how this continues to grow.
And I think you mentioned a point that I think is key. And on the way I see Excel spreadsheets, and the Excel spreadsheets were created or begin as a product of one. Okay, you are the one who has X responsibility that lies on Excel, whatever it was. And I agree, a lot of them that was the first simpler database to create because you could do filtering, you can do a bunch of incredible things. But as the world has gone more mobile and more light in a certain way, is there people to continue having ridiculously large Excel sheets that only they open? Yes. But Excel now is a collaboration tool, and I think it's not necessarily that it's a 20% use, it's that it's a different product inside of a product. So there is this use for this still the people who had, all the rows and all the columns on Excel on a spreadsheet that goes page to page, documents to documents. That's one use, and that's one use that to this day will continue being a desktop use, mostly because of the power you need and the kind of interaction you need to have. But Excel now, more and more, is a place where you go to do little things. And when I look at my spreadsheets, it's rare that I have now one that is so complex that need to run on on the computer. It can run on the iPad. It can run on Google Sheets. But it's rare when I think I have only one spreadsheet that in order for me to run it, I need to go and remotely log in the Mac. Everything else, and it's mostly because of the way it do some SQL queries, and it goes outside on the network. Other than that, all the spreadsheets I have are more simple calculations that look simple now, but it used to be really complex things that you share, and now they are on a remote desk, as you said, and everybody can go and look at it. And before, it's not that you don't have them, it's just that you used to print it. If I remember having on my desk piles of spreadsheets, because there was usually somebody in the office who was in charge of doing those. Now, all those printouts tend to be a digital version of a really simple spreadsheet that goes back and forward. From things like even expense reports. Expense reports, when I begin working, I remember you have this special sheet, okay, that you fill up in paper, okay, that only have 4 lines. So if for any reason you have 7 items, you need 2 sheets of those. Okay, there was no way to do it any other way. Now, that's a spreadsheet, okay, that is shared, that everybody can go, get their information, transfer to PDF, email it, and call it a day. So I don't know if it's that is 2 different products. I for sure think it's 2 different needs.
I don't know if I would argue the fact that it's going simpler. I think it lends itself to simpler implementations because we're comfortable with it. And the reason why I'll say that is if you look at corporate environments, there's corporate workbook implementations that are multiple workbooks interfaced together with external data connection. I've pulled one up in front of me right now, and it's just absolutely massive. And I guarantee there's no way that, at least current state, it's going to exist within the cloud environment. However,
Agreed.
The exact same tool that is running that beast is also running very basic checklists. So I think you're right in the standpoint that it covers that range, but I think until we start to see the cloud-based solutions increase their functionality almost by an order of magnitude, I think we're always going to have this desktop presence because there's another piece to this equation. If you look at all the applications within a standard Office suite, the spreadsheet is the one application that does not translate well to the smartphone from a usability standpoint. Fine on tablets, fine on Chromebooks, fine on desktops. But if you try and use a spreadsheet on a smartphone, it's really an awkward user experience. So until we find some way around that, and honestly, I don't know that we can because spreadsheets are designed, it's in the name, it's a spreadsheet. It needs visual landscape to be able to work with. I don't know that it's ever going to cleanly translate to the smaller screen that is the smartphone.
On that, I agree with you. If your needs are complex, actually, I have been iPad only and coaching people on how to turn to iPad only. My first question, even before we got into the discussion, is how much Excel do you use? Because I can do on the iPad 99% of anything you ask me for, unless you throw Excel in the equation. And yes, if you want that mobile, simple checklist, a couple of calculations here or there, you can use it. But as soon as you need the complexity that goes behind the spreadsheet, forget about it. You need a different set of tools than the iPad, even if you have the 13-inch iPad. It's something about how you interact with the Excel that for some reason require much precision than your finger.
The interesting thing about this is that we will see Microsoft and Google, and to an extent Apple as well, look at the movement in terms of, we're talking about sort of feature parity and their functionalities, whether desktop or web. We're going to see Microsoft, Google, and Apple watch users and see whether or not they adopt more and more web technologies and web software over desktop software. And I think the trend is moving that way, which is why Google developed Chrome OS, which is why they're really banking on people wanting to stay within their web browser all the time, as opposed to using desktop software. And there are some of us of a certain age that typically lends toward desktop software because we grew up with it, we're used to it. But I think for millennials and younger who are just used to being in the browser, and that being their only access to the entire world, therefore, why shouldn't their software work? I think that's going to become a bigger chunk of software development. It already has over the last 20 years, but I think it's going to become a faster clip at it. G Suite, they are developing something called App Maker, and App Maker is going to revolutionize how we interact with underlying data in even a spreadsheet sense and really across the board. What I think has happened is we've reduced the usage of spreadsheet software because we have more software that has once done what spreadsheets did for us, and not necessarily in being able to see large data sets in a spreaded sheet, right? As you said, Art. But now those kinds of small data, chunks have now been put in places like Evernote or in bespoke software that manages like CRM. We used to use our entire CRM was just basically Excel, and now you have dozens and dozens of CRMs that are designed specifically for industries, and that's just the nature of the fragmentation of the market, because there's so much customized software. There's like a supposed solution for every kind of thing to get things done, and I think that's just sort of going to be the nature of it as we move forward.
Well, if you look at the way the two main players in this, and I'll use Microsoft and Google as the example in this, and the direction that they're heading, you've got, and I mentioned it before, you've got Microsoft from the desktop world moving into the cloud, and you've got Google from the cloud emulating and moving closer towards desktop-level functionality. Both of them are trying to get to that common ground that the end users have clearly indicated they want, which is we want as much power as possible. And from an IT standpoint, we don't have to want to worry about desktop deployments and large installations on my machine. We want the flexibility of the cloud. We want instant updates, and we want cloud-based data storage. And it's how the companies are going to integrate the spreadsheets and the other parts of their Office suite into their full offering that really, I think, is going to make the difference. And I'll give you the example off of Excel. If you're using, let's say, SharePoint, and you've got an Excel sheet inside of SharePoint, that's now collaborative because it's available to anybody who's using that SharePoint site who has access. But if you open OneNote, you can embed the Excel worksheet into a OneNote note as a usable worksheet. It's that tying the pieces together. Now, I have a bit of a concern with that, though. While it's great to have that, it almost starts to create confusion for end users. Which way do I go? What's the best way to come in? What's the best way to do this? And I think in the productivity space that the three of us live in, if we are focusing on getting people to understand the core tenets of good spreadsheet use, regardless of the platform, I think we're doing them the service that they need. Then they can say, okay, this is the one that's going to work best for me, or this other one's going to work best for me, because I know basically the right ways to do this.
One of the fundamental things that I think about when it comes to the variety of software that I think of is obviously it's what core functionality do you need? And most often than not, and I think we've sort of been saying this as we make our way along, is that a lot of people have chosen Excel when Excel isn't the appropriate tool. The great part is that we do now have a lot of different software out there, and just within the spreadsheet space, I think I said this at the top, but I'm going to repeat it again. You have four major software today: Microsoft Excel, Google Sheets, Apple Numbers, and LibreOffice Calc. Are there any other spreadsheet workbook software out there that I'm not knowing, that I'm missing, guys?
Not major ones that I know. I mean, there's variants on LibreCalc. There's some other cloud-based ones that I've looked at in various flavors that haven't made a major impact in the environment. I think you've hit the core four. I would caution one thing, though. I think a lot of people are using Excel because in a corporate environment, that's what they're given. They don't get access to the other ones because through various IT security protocols, they're prevented from using things outside the corporate IT structure. So when you sit down at your machine and you log into it, I have Excel, therefore Excel is what I shall use. They're kind of stuck with it.
I completely agree, and I think that's one of the things I do caution people about is look at the functions and features that you need out of the software, especially when it comes to displaying and or calculating a lot of different numbers at once. Then look at the various products for their strengths. Microsoft Excel, I typically think of its strength in its ability to communicate with the other Office products. So if you're already in the Microsoft Office Productivity Suite, then it makes a lot of sense that you stay with Excel. Excel, I'm talking in the desktop version, not in the Office 365 cloud version, because it's a more limited product set. It's developing, just like Google Sheets. For me, I use G Suite for both business and most of my personal world. So Google Sheets is going to make a lot of sense because I'm already there, and I'm not doing as complex. I mean, Google Sheets has a huge formula database. It can communicate all the data between applications. With Google Apps Script, you can connect Google Sheets to all the other Google Drive products, Google Documents, Google Forms, Google Slides. You can communicate cross application as well. So you're not limited in the same way you once were when you had to do something very complex, and Microsoft Excel could all of a sudden do that. It can handle charting and graphing really well today, and now is using machine learning in order to be able to, on the fly, ask questions of Google Sheets, and it just gives you the appropriate answer back from the data that you put in. Of course, garbage in, garbage out. So you've got to put the data in correctly and then get the data out correctly. And that's really fantastic. Apple Numbers is just a really fun. I think of it as, if you're gonna have to have the misery of dealing with lots and lots of data entry, Numbers can actually be a lot of fun. It has a really interesting interface. And again, if you're in the Apple Pages, world, you're in iCloud, all of it's Apple Numbers will work for you. I mean, it's not going to not work for you. The problem is getting that document to others to view. It's going to be going to be very difficult.
It used to be that true, and that continue being. Now I do a lot on Numbers, and I work on Numbers until I get into the requirement of a pivot table, mostly because you can't do a pivot table in Numbers. Why? I don't know. I have my own theory about it, and it's that Steve Jobs never did one, so that it would never make it to the list of features. But if you don't need a pivot table, you can go Numbers, no problem. You can, even at the moment of share it with somebody, you can send it as an Excel, and nobody will know that you did that on a different platform than Excel. So I've been for a really long time now, again, if I don't need a pivot table, living in Numbers, mostly for what you described. I can create it on one device, and it will show up on another device without me doing any effort. And I can even edit, in multiple devices. And at the time of sharing, you can send it via Excel and set converted in Excel, and nobody will know that you didn't even have Excel open in order to create that. So on that job, Apple has done a magnificent job from the first version of Numbers that wasn't true. When before Numbers came to the iPad, that was actually true and sometimes was a challenge. After they ported to the iPad, mostly thanks to Microsoft, who decided not to make a portable version of Excel for the iPad, and Apple trying to get into the corporate world, Apple understood that the only way to get Numbers strong on their devices was to make it fully compatible with Excel. And it wasn't on the first version, 2010. It was on the second version, I think it was 2011, where you could really not tell the difference between an Excel-made spreadsheet versus a Numbers-made spreadsheet.
think you're hitting on probably the most important aspect of this, is that, and not to get down in the technical weeds, but file format transportability is the key of all of this. Because every time we talk about one of these solutions, whether it's Apple Numbers, whether it's Excel Online, whether it's Google Sheets, there's a ceiling you hit in capability. Mm-hmm. And once you hit that ceiling, you're going to have to take a step to something else, probably to a desktop client, probably to something like Excel. So the portability of that file format, without having to do a lot of rework when you get to the other side, make those changes, and then be able to bring it back, is huge. I mean, I hear it all the time when people will go through and do something. It's like, I tried to do it in Excel, and it changed all my formatting, and the layouts are wrong. Well, it's because it doesn't quite interpret the formats right, and that's just incredibly frustrating to end users. When we think about it, when we guide somebody on what choices they're going to make, I think we have to be able to help them understand where is that ceiling about the things that they're going to need. If somebody were to ask me, what cloud-based spreadsheet should I use, I'm going, well, let's think about exactly what you need to accomplish in the grandest scheme. And at that point say, well, two of the things you want to do, you're just not going to be able to do in the cloud. You may not even want to start there. Or everything that you want to accomplish, absolutely. And it'll work exactly in the suite you're using. Go ahead and use Google Sheets. You'll be in business. It's a matter of understanding capabilities of the platforms, I think.
I agree, and as I throw flowers at Apple for how well that change between Excel and Numbers work. Okay, sadly we cannot say the same thing when you now go to Pages and Keynote. Okay.
Oh, don't get me started.
If you start on Pages, you are stuck with Pages forever. Okay?
You know what? I'm not going to throw flowers at Microsoft either, because they got problems getting stuff between items within their own suite of applications. So I mean, talk about crossing vendors.
Well, I will stand on the side of free open source software here, which is having open document formats, and this is why I wanted to have LibreOffice on sort of discussed a little bit here, only to the effect that it's actually to Microsoft's credit. They have, and Google as well, which is that they've both supported open document format for word processing documents as well as for spreadsheet software. So now you have that ability to be able to go from LibreOffice Calc, which is the desktop software equivalent to Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, and you're able to take those documents and those files and transfer them between each of them. And also, I will say that a lot of them actually have depended upon one another for being able to move forward with these things. Google looked at Microsoft Excel and just reverse engineered its features to get it into the cloud. There's no question about that. Mm-hmm. Apple tried to be a little bit different in the way in which they implemented Numbers, but really they just saw Excel and said, okay, what can we do that'll be new and interesting on top of what Excel has already done? And LibreOffice Calc is really, it's supposed to literally have software parity to Excel. So they all leapt off of one another, but they've been watching each other's development over these years, playing off of one another. It's very similar to retail marketing. The goal of having a Starbucks next to Dunkin' Donuts and next to whatever other coffee shop du jour, the reality is that by having that competition, you actually drive up sales. There's a saturation point that actually increases people's usage, and I think that's kind of a corollary to what's happening today with spreadsheet software. I think all of us here are actually using one or multiple of these software because of the fact that we're working with people who are using that in one environment. We need it for different reasons in different environments, and that's just the nature of it today. We're not going to only use one. You're going to use Google Sheets in your personal life because you have a Gmail account and a Google Drive, and you use that with your family for making a holiday list or whatever it might be, and that's what you're going to use. And then when you're at the office and you're locked down by potentially security, as Art said, you're going to use Excel. So I think we all have to be very, very conscious of that, but I will get up on my soapbox just for a moment to say that everyone should support open document formats. You should not have proprietary formats for software locking you into a particular software. I think that's really, really dangerous for all of us in society, not feel trapped by one particular software package or corporation or another. And I think that's really, really important for us all to sort of keep in mind.
I would have to say that spreadsheets are probably the most ubiquitous, unattractive, boring aspects of productivity tools we have, and they're also probably the most frequently used. So the best thing anyone can do, it doesn't matter what platform, what ecosystem you want to be in, take time to learn the basic feature sets that are in there, get comfortable with it, pick one, stick with it for a while so that it becomes second nature, and just use it. And if you find that it hits a wall, use something else. There's nothing that's marrying you to a particular item unless it's being forced on you.
I think that was a great description. The spreadsheets are the most boring part of productivity, but the reality is you're going to use them regardless. You may like or not like Excel, may like or not like numbers or sheets for that matter, but the reality is most likely you are going to use them and use them often. So the only way to make that pain less painful is to be able to learn to use the product well and to be good at it. The reality is, for most people, their struggle with Excel and any spreadsheet for that matter is a matter of they don't know the tricks and the formulas and the stuff to make the job much, much easier because it's boring and they have not then spent the time or invest the time learning how to make it in an easier way. Spreadsheets are incredibly magic and powerful, not only from a productivity but even a production point of view. So regardless if you go desktop or laptop or what, it's needed.
Well, thank you guys so much. This has been ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things personal productivity. I'm your host, Ray Sidney Smith, with my co-host, Augusto Pinaud.
Thank you very much, Art, for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm looking forward to the next one.
If you use a particular spreadsheet software, let us know. Come on over to ProductivityCast.net, comment on the show notes, and just let us know on that episode what spreadsheet software you use and why you use it. We'd love to hear from you and potentially any questions you have about which one you might use and why. We'll be happy to answer those questions. So with that, we're signing out. Here's to your productive life.
Thank you very much.
That's it for this episode of ProductivityCast, the weekly show about all things productivity, with your hosts, Ray Sidney Smith and Augusto Pinaud.